Well, good evening, IsenhourSpeaks fans. This is a Thursday for once in a while, and we're going to have again another opportunity to talk with Miss Teresa Roane because last week we talked to her and we had an astonishing thing happen. She was actually so popular that literally thousands of people viewed in, and we also had a run on duct tape because people were just wrapping their heads because they couldn't believe all the truths that she was saying. So we have the duct tape ready for this, Miss Teresa. And I just also want to say that she was wonderful in her explanation and so seriously, but yet most of the comments were very, very supportive. However, we did have some of the comments by the, let's say, the detractors, the deniers of black Confederates. But we're going to continue the series tonight, and she's going to talk about a whole bunch of things that y'all haven't seen. So, if you are a detractor, get your duct tape ready. If you're a Southern patriot, take notes.
Miss Teresa.
Yeah. Miss Teresa, what do you have to tell us tonight?
Well, Mr. Eisenhower, it's good to be back again. Well, last week we talked about Confederates of color and we concentrated on men, but there are actually some service records of women at the National Archives.
Interesting.
So I thought tonight I would share a few of those. I mean, like there's Catherine Dawson, who was with the 63rd Georgia Infantry. She served as a cook.
Okay.
And so did Hannah Dawson, who was with the 63rd Georgia Infantry. And then there's Julia Bellman, who was a free woman of color, who was actually on a hospital muster roll. So
Well, see, that was actually unusual because generally men were the nurses and things of the hospital.
that's correct, but you just never know. I mean, that's why, this history is so complex. The other thing, if people don't understand or believe, Conrad Wise Chapman, who was an artist, served in the Confederate military, and he actually created a painting where he's showing camp life, and it's fascinating because if you look at it, it shows a variety of people in the painting. So you've got men, probably of different ethnic groups there. In the painting, they look white, but also there are men of color in the camp, and there's a woman of color in the camp. So it's different, and the reason why I like it is because he's portraying what it was,
The real camp
the
life.
the real reality.
Now, was this done in either Florida or South Carolina?
It was
that
Corinth.
Corinth? Okay, so that was Mississippi then.
That was Mississippi.
My bad.
But I just think it's so interesting because people just do not understand this whole Confederate effort. So I thought it would be nice for people to see that tonight. But the main subject tonight is Confederate pensions. And Confederate pensions are so complicated and so complex because pensions, the laws varied among the states. So you had some states that awarded pensions through class, in other words, in different
Right.
kind of levels, and others that didn't. You also had some states that only gave pensions to Confederate veterans that are living in one of those Confederate homes.
Confederate homes.
So, what I'm going to talk about tonight is about the non-combatants of color who will receive Confederate pensions.
Okay.
Now, their pensions did not come until the 20th century. And because of that, historians have a viewpoint, so they criticize the pensions for the Confederates of color. And
Right.
for example, they say, well, they came later after many of them had died, and so, but if they are a myth,
That's why they had pensions.
yeah, are you saying that they really did exist? So
Right.
they deserve a pension? Is that what you're saying?
And many of their family members or their spouses have got these pensions too.
Well, it that varied too. I mean, a lot of times the widows were denied the pension. Well, let's take for example Weary Clyburn. Weary Clyburn actually received a pension. Now, unfortunately, a few years ago, a friend of mine told me, "Oh, well, historians said that he didn't receive a pension." And I said, "That's not true." So I showed her he received a pension. It was a Class B pension.
Okay.
And what happened was the widow was not able to receive a pension.
'Cause she was younger at that time.
Well, I don't know why she did
Okay.
not, but it may have been that the laws in the state did not provide for, the widow of color. So here, there was this lie being perpetuated out there, and yet we know that he did receive something. Now, the other thing is that there's a lot of criticism about the fact that non-combatants of color didn't receive as much money as someone receiving a soldier's pension.
Right.
And that's true, but let's look at it this way. If the South had not given them anything, what would we be hearing today? That
Exactly.
they were racist. It would not help fund some of these non-combatants of color with some kind of money to make it through. And we actually also know that there were a few that received a soldier's pension.
Right.
Now, let's remember, there's no unified payment because it just depended on where you lived in the state. And so, you had to be destitute anyway to receive
Right.
a pension. And if you lived in a rural area, the whole idea is to give you some funding so that you can at least plant
Right.
crops, and so you can live off of that. So, we need to understand that. So I'm just glad to see that some non-combatants of color did receive pension.
Sure.
Now, when I talk about the fact that some received a soldier's pension,
Right.
there is some proof of that. I'm going to talk about one of them. One was Silas Green, and there's a photograph of him in a carriage with two other men who were veterans of color, and he's actually the one in the middle. Now,
So the reunion.
one of the
We've seen
reunions.
this in the carriage of these.
Yeah, and they were having a parade
Parades,
in Lynchburg.
So we've seen this.
And the interesting thing about it is you can see in the beginning he received what they would call a servant's Confederate pension. Well, there's a letter attached to his pension, and it said that according to his service, it seems like he deserves a soldier's pension because they have done that for some of the Confederate veterans of color. So all you see at the top, all of a sudden, that he's gone from 10 to 40.
Right.
And it's absolutely fascinating. Now, there's a marker about him that says that he applied for a pension and never received one.
But yet he did, once again, either misinformation, whether it was intentional or not, we don't know, but it was some misinformation.
Right. And here's the other thing I want everybody to understand. In order to get a Confederate pension, you made an application, you filled it out, or someone filled it out for you, because not everybody knew how to read and write. Okay, here's what you need to understand. Depending on the state, you need anywhere from 2 to 4 men to endorse you to say that you actually did the service. Who did they go to? These men went to white men who served. So they endorsed them. And this is during the age of Jim Crow.
Exactly.
So this was a big deal. So do you think these white Confederate veterans will risk their lives or their reputation by lying on an application?
No.
I don't think so.
That's one thing that you point out that we need to realize, that the northern carpetbaggers and people who were in our legislatures and stuff who brought these Jim Crow laws to the South. And so it was not the Southern people that brought this. It was actually coming out from these legislators and stuff who were coming from out of town, so to speak. We have a lot of probably out of town folks. The Southern folks who served with these men respected these men because they're veterans together. So they were actually had to have the kind of cohesion that a unit has, because these men served honorably. It's very important to realize that in an age, like you mentioned, in the Jim Crow era, which again made a how can I say it, the public view it. These men were standing up for their comrades in arms and saying, "You were real. You deserve this." And so that is a bold statement. When some of the people may say, "Well, why would you do that?" Well, veterans take care of veterans.
Right. That is true. And also, some people say, well, some of these Confederate veterans of color were rejected and didn't receive a pension. Well, since I deal with pensions a lot, dealing with research, there were white men who were rejected and widows who were rejected. So
You're saying that the bureaucracy that exists today existed then also.
You're right. And one of the other issues people need to understand, a lot of times these men who represent the pension board would go to the National Archives to try to look for these services, and sometimes they couldn't find any information that someone served, whether you were white or someone of color. But what people don't understand, and people don't even understand today, the National Archives does not have every Confederate service record because they're based on muster rolls, and not all the muster rolls are at the National Archives. A lot of them have been destroyed, or there's some muster rolls in other archives across the United States.
Different states, Confederate states,
right, right. So so this is not unusual. This is not unusual. So you do what you can do. But what I want to end with today is a really interesting story about one person of color who received a Confederate pension. And her name was Lavinia Thompson.
Okay.
And she was a cook for the 1st South Carolina Reserves from 1862 to 1865. She's the only woman of color to receive a Confederate veteran pension. And when she applied, she was approved within 3 days.
Wow. In an age where that was fast for that day.
That was fast. And God bless her, she finally has a headstone.
Okay.
There was a headstone dedication about a year and a half ago. Okay. And so she now has one. So
now, are you saying that the Veterans Administration gave her a Confederate veteran marker, or was this a private marker that was
done? When you look at the marker, it looks like a VA marker.
Okay.
I attended the service. It was a wonderful turnout. And I think it's remarkable. Evidently, she was well thought of. To have your pension reviewed and approved within 3 days, I think that's astonishing.
It means that she made a remarkable, how can I say it? Her service was remarkably known. There was people knew about her.
Right.
Which means that she took care of what she did. And you talk about, in this case, cooking. But yet, a unit in the field runs off its stomach.
It does.
And so to have someone who was dedicated to make sure that these soldiers were well fed in a time where the cooks could not always provide, they had to make do with what they had, shows great imagination and stuff and dedication for what she did to her soldiers. Again, she was just as much part of that unit as a line soldier would be, and is respected too.
Right. So as I keep telling people, remember, history is not black and white.
No, it's not.
It's actually very, very gray.
That is one thing that we have to remember, folks, is when the detractors come at us and talk about how we somehow are such a racist group, the Confederacy, etc. It's just not true. It's just not true. It doesn't even jive with the facts. It doesn't even jive with Southern history. The black folks and the white folks have been living together now for 300 plus years in this country. We have a great affinity for each other. However, there are people who try to separate us, as they did during that time. Because remember, if you had the ex-slaves in many cases, and actually these ex-slaves now could vote. that changed the politics of the time. And they had to separate them. The northern people had to separate that because if the southern blacks voted along with the southern whites at that time, it would change the balance of power in Congress, which kind of begs the question, why would you have had a war for the subjugation of the South if the South was going to come back with such voting power in the Congress again? So you have to understand there were a lot of people who wanted to make sure that black folks and white folks didn't get along. And they did that. They were racist at that time. And they are the ones that mostly are from up north. And I have to admit that their descendants are the ones that are giving us trouble now, saying there's no such thing as a black Confederate soldier. It kind of goes together with all the stuff that we're told. We've been lied to for years and years and years. And when you hear history like this, which is historical facts, as you can see on IsenhourSpeaks here, we have a lot of this documentation out there that you can see. And then you still deny it? Well, there's only one conclusion, that you have a political agenda. In other words, you don't care about the truth of the history. You care about your political agenda. And if you care about your political agenda, I ain't got no use for you. And you should not listen to these people. They are detractors of the truth. We talk about truth in the South. The South has an honorable history. No, we're not perfect, never were perfect, never claimed to be perfect. However, as far as that war goes, it was a horrible situation that both black and white suffered dearly through that war. And we rebuilt the South, black and white. We rebuilt the stuff. And for folks who think that all these black folks always say, oh, we're out of this slavery stuff and we're going up north, they did not. The migration did not happen until the 1930s. And you had the black folks and the white folks in Reconstruction in the South in the poor conditions, helping each other rebuild their communities. And many of these communities still exist to this day. And we have to remember that when you're told by people who are looking at their political agenda and talking history, that doesn't go with it. History is to be written down by the people, the historians, who talk about the history of the people at that time, not your modern day views. That's what we say. You don't look through the eyes of the 19th century through the 21st century. That's what many of these historians are doing today. And they're not really historians. What they are politically correct people who are trying to alter, lie, and abolish the true history. And we just don't want to let that happen. I do want to thank you for coming on again. Your ratings are great. You've made IsenhourSpeaks so popular. So we need to make sure that you come back at some time. Maybe not next week, but we need to do some other things because you have a wealth of knowledge that you need to get out there through a different medium. Because this knowledge, I will also say, folks, I said last week, she has this out on her Facebook. A lot of this stuff has already been out there, but y'all are not reading it. You're liking it, but you ain't reading it. See, that's the thing. If you like something, that's great, but you need to read it. That's the purpose that she has it out there for you, to read it and understand what these people at that time went through. Many of them are our ancestors. And it's important that we know their history. And so liking and checking stuff on Facebook is all fine. Nothing wrong with that. But you've got to learn this history. And she gives you this knowledge that you can learn it. And then you can talk about these people who come at us and say there were no such thing as black Confederates. Or even the unique thing that you had in the Confederate Army, women, not only women of color, but white women who also served in the Confederate Army in different capacities. This is very important to understand this type of stuff. This is true history. As Ms. Teresa says, history is not easily understood. You've got to read history. That's why us historians, and yes, for you who say that I am not a historian, as I've said before, I don't have the degrees. She has the degrees. I don't have the degrees. But I do know a lot of history because I've been studying this war for 50-some years. And so keep in mind that we look forward to your comments. And for all kinds of lights going on out here. It must be the government. It must be the Russians doing that. I don't know anything. Russians are doing that. They don't want the truth to go out there. Anyway, I appreciate you coming in, and we'll do this again some other time. For right now, we'll see y'all later. Bye-bye.
Bye.